Thank you for joining us on the Winning at Selling podcast. I'm Bill Hellkamp of Reach Development Systems, and with me is Professor Scott Plum of the Minnesota Sales Institute.
Creating influential conversations is the goal of every salesperson. The outcome is a collaboration between the prospect and the salesperson agreeing on the exchange of value for a price. Sometimes salespeople need to negotiate to create and define what's most valuable in that exchange. Let's spend some time together and crack the collaboration code as Bill and I welcome Nan Gesche on episode 569 of the Winning at Selling podcast.
I'm looking forward to talking to Nan, and to affect that conversation, we have no book club today, as we do whenever we have a guest. We skip the book club. But next week, we'll be back into How to Win Friends and Influence People, Part 2, Chapters 4, 5, and 6. But I'm looking forward to meeting you, Nan, and I hear you're someone who does know how to win friends and influence people. So
She's got many years experience on that. Let me share a little background on Nan, and then we can welcome her. So Nan is an energetic speaker who uses experience, insight, and some sturdy research, all sprinkled with a little bit of humor to get people to see themselves and the world differently. Her passion is helping people play well together. Nan provides audiences a chance to ponder and practice different ways of thinking and acting around change, conflict, decision-making, communication, and leadership, all with the goal of providing more positive outcomes. Nan has been engaging large and small audiences nationally. She is the catalyst who makes change doable. Her 20-plus years of independent and corporate experience allow her to stretch people's thinking to help them focus on the realities of life and business. So welcome to the show, Nan.
welcome, Nan.
Thank you. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Yeah, it'll be fun. This is always an interesting topic as Bill and I talk about sales and negotiations, because we have different beliefs and mindsets on that. And one of them is that I just don't believe that salespeople should negotiate, because they think negotiating is just cutting the price. That's offering a concession. And during our conversation today, I know we're going to get into a little bit deeper about how salespeople can be effective in the process of negotiations.
Well, and I know Scott is wrong.
I am.
And if you don't know how to negotiate, you'll do it poorly, because you're going to do it anyway. And so I'd rather know about it than not know about it. But let's hear what Nan has to say.
Yeah.
That's an old argument the audience has already heard.
Yeah, exactly.
Nan, you're the tiebreaker on this.
Well, we've all been negotiating everything since the day we were born. So it's just
True.
Our technique. Some of us haven't changed our technique very much, from throwing temper tantrums and crying to figuring out how to do it more effectively.
That's right.
That's very, very true. I was grateful to hear Nan present this morning. She did a fabulous job, engaged everybody. I mean, the hour went by so quick. And one of the things that she talked about is in negotiations, there's the 2 R's of negotiations. And this was really fascinating to me, and I think a lot of people need to know about it. So, Nan, can you share that with our audience?
Well, the 2 R's of negotiating is what I think of: results and relationships. And it's interesting, because when I talk to people, I'm like, well, which one is more important? And they're like, well, it depends on who I'm negotiating with. And I'm like, what do you mean? If I'm negotiating, they say, with the car dealer or, on selling a product, it's all about the results. If it's a family member, somebody you care for, it's about the relationship. And what I would tell you is, it doesn't matter who you're negotiating with. You should be considering both the results and the relationship, because the relationship is important, because you use that to understand the other person's needs, wants, values, and interests to figure out how you both can get better results.
Well, I think that theoretically that sounds nice, and maybe I come at negotiating from a different aspect sometimes, but and maybe it's the competitor in me, but I do tend to find myself feeling competitive when I get into a negotiation. And while I want both sides to win, I'm really more interested in me winning. So what happens if we have these feelings where we're trying to win, yet we know, like with a family member or with a customer, we have to have a long-term relationship with them?
Yeah, winning, actually, if your mindset is already set on winning, you're not ready to actually have a conversation and negotiate, because part of negotiations is really being open to understanding the other person's perspective. So negotiation doesn't start with the deal. It starts with making the other person feel safe, valued, and trusted, so that they will share information with you so you know better what to negotiate. And when we go in there with the mindset that we're going to win, we've already turned this into a power struggle versus going in with the mindset that we both have an opportunity to learn and figure out how to help each other.
It's always interesting every time we talk about growth and change and we talk about techniques and behaviors, it always starts with a mindset. What do we do differently in our head first? Because how we show up in our behavior always starts with our beliefs. And it's just powerful to see that constant theme of mindset, mindset, mindset. And having a growth mindset versus a fixed mindset seems to be really the key in any type of collaboration or negotiations. Mm-hmm. Sometimes people get into that power struggle, and sometimes they feel like they don't have an advantage of leverage in that conversation. What are some of your tips or advice for people when it comes to negotiating and not feeling like you have any leverage?
Well, leverage is actually a tricky perspective because we don't know what leverage we have always until we actually get into the conversation sometimes. So a lot of times we may go into a situation thinking we don't have any until we pay attention to the other person, not necessarily just what they say, but how they show up. So if I can give you a quick story, one time I was in Park City visiting some friends and we were shopping and we went into this store to get some shoes. And the salesperson, you could tell, was not having a good day. You know, they have their hands on the counter and they're rubbing their forehead, you know, and I'm like having a tough day. And it's like, yeah, I think I have the flu. And I'm like, and I said, well, you know, hopefully somebody can come in and replace you. And he's like, nope, nobody can come replace me. And I said, well, maybe you could lock the door. So, I mean, close early. And he's like, I locked the door when you ladies came in to let nobody in. But I'm watching him, and it became very clear watching him that what he valued was not the sale of shoes. What he valued was us getting out of the store as fast as possible. So when we were trying on shoes, finally, I looked at this guy because he was so miserable. And I just said, I tell you what, if you give us 50% off anything we take right now, we'll leave immediately. He's like, great, bring it to the counter. And, you know, it just emblazoned into my brain that it isn't always about the money. We have to think about what other things people need. You know, maybe they want to be there anymore. Maybe they've got someplace they want to be. Maybe they have an emotional attachment. Maybe they don't. But those are important components of the negotiation process that we are never going to understand unless we are paying attention to the other individual as a person and try and build some relationship with them to understand where they are coming from.
Yeah. So one of the things it sounds like you're saying, Nan, is that it's important to get pre-approach information. It's important to have good conversations with people, to have these negotiations. But sometimes they don't tell us the truth. If they know they're going to go into some kind of a negotiated settlement, they're going to try and hide some of these things. I mean, your conversation with the shoe salesman, he was making it very obvious. But when I'm in a $500,000 negotiation, they're planning to hide some of this information, and they might even lie to me and tell me how wonderful their current supplier is. So what do we do if we're not getting the right information? And how can we get better information going into a negotiation?
Well, to your point, going into the negotiation, you have to do your own homework. And so there's the homework on what can you find out about the process, the client, the alternatives. You also have to do your own mental homework. Am I prepared to have a really hard conversation? And am I mentally prepared sometimes to walk away? And am I mentally prepared to ask them a hard question about providing specific data or proof to support the information that they're giving? You know, and so it's being willing to challenge and ask those hard questions. But every negotiation requires that we do our homework beforehand. And we shouldn't go into any negotiations not knowing what our alternatives are, because if that is your only customer, your only supplier, and you don't know who your alternatives are, you've given up some of your leverage.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And I do think a big part of negotiation is the amount of leverage you have and the amount you can help them to understand. Right. It might be the quality of the product. It might be that there's a limited supply, whatever that is. But if you can't communicate that to them, if you can't build that desire in them, then it's not really a valued power or leverage.
Yeah. And as you said, sometimes other people are going to have more leverage and you have a hard time trying to find a foothold. And that's just the reality of life sometimes, is that occasionally people are going to have more leverage than you are. And that does give them a leg up at times.
Right.
That's just reality.
It seems like that leverage is the moment in time. And sometimes when you get past that, and there's another opportunity, then maybe that opportunity creates a little bit more leverage in your favor so that you can balance things out. It's a conversation that goes on even past a sale, past a commitment. You're still negotiating. There's still stuff being traded. Does that sound pretty true?
Oh, absolutely. Any really complex negotiation and conversation is rarely done in one sitting.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. That you're going to have to sit down and start the conversation. And that's where I said, you start with building the relationship and the trust at the very beginning. And part of it is understanding that our reputation precedes us, so to the comment that some people just aren't trustworthy, that Bill was talking about, they lie. Well, their reputation will precede them.
Mm-hmm.
People will figure that out after a while. And, who wants to negotiate with anybody who has that type of reputation?
Well,
Right.
we may not want to negotiate with them, but I think in some cases we're forced to do that, right? This is our biggest client and this is who they're putting in front of me to negotiate with. So while I might not necessarily, we may have done everything we wanted to do, had a good conversation, but we may not trust them as much as we hope they're trusting us, or they're having pressure put on them by their company to get that price down. A lot of our listeners end up talking with procurement, and they've got one goal: get the price down, not get the quality up. So we're kind of slammed into untenable situations sometimes.
And I really struggle with that because, and I understand that, but it's just like I have clients sometimes reach out to me, well, how can you help us be more efficient? And I'm like, how about being more effective?
Mm-hmm.
That having the lowest cost product, being the most efficient, doesn't always make you the most effective. Banks, I work in banking with banks, and, yes, they measure their efficiency ratios, but sometimes when you get that efficiency ratio down so far, you've lost the human component.
Right. Wow.
You've lost that effectiveness and that connectiveness. And, especially for smaller community banks, that whole connected piece is what's most important.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And if you negotiate yourself into a bad deal, you didn't do yourself any good.
Yeah.
Wow. I see that being very competitive in today's marketplaces. Everybody wants to make the exchange and the conversation more efficient. And in doing that, there's the loss of value. And we're not dealing with people anymore. We're just following a process. It seems like when I call a big telecom company, then they have a customer avoidance system that they've installed. and they don't want to talk to anybody. They want to force you to go to the internet. And then when you do finally get the chance to talk to somebody, you can hardly understand what they're saying. And what are they doing is they're creating efficiency in the conversation or the process, and they're reducing value. And we as consumers have a choice to decide who we want to work with. And when we start supporting what's most valuable to us, the market will change. But we have to take the initiative to do that. Stop buying on price, start buying on value.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a conscious decision when it comes to sales and negotiations. So Nan, I'm kind of curious, when it comes to negotiations, what do you think are some of the important attributes that every person should consider when they're in negotiations?
Their own personal attributes. Well, number one, you need to know your own style. You have to know your style of negotiations. You need to know how you manage your emotions. You have to know what your hot buttons are. Like what are the things that people are going to say that are going to send you over the deep end?
Mm-hmm.
What are you going to do to manage those emotions should they push those buttons?
Right.
And so learning to know your style and manage your emotions, as well as learning how to ask good questions and really listen at a much deeper level are core.
Yeah. Yeah. It seems like
Tell me what you mean by listening at a deeper level. I know I'm not a real good listener, but how will I listen deeper?
Well, when we listen, a lot of times we listen for if you've ever heard the phrase kind of above the line and below the line in communication. So above the line is we're listening for data, facts, information. Below the line is learning to listen to the meaning, the emotions, the value that the people you're interacting with give to that data. And so it's understanding how people feel, the reaction, the impact to them. And you listen for that, because you're not just listening to what they are saying. You're trying to listen to how that conversation is making them feel, or their reaction to the information that's being exchanged, because that emotional component is a huge part of the negotiation process. You're looking for those shifts in their behavior to identify what might be more important to them.
The feeling that you got from that shoe salesman that he just wanted to get out of there. That was his major. Yeah. Oh, interesting. Good. Thanks.
So some of the other techniques that you talked about earlier today, one of them is looping. What are some of the things that salespeople do that create this listening technique of looping?
Well, looping is paraphrasing what you heard them say. What I heard you say is, so hopefully, when we are in a sales position or a negotiating position, we should be asking more questions than giving answers. And so, especially in that first meeting or two, so that you can understand them. So when you ask them a good question, you step back, you listen, and then you paraphrase. What I heard you say is, and speak to maybe both above and below the line, you're irritated by the quality of the service you got on that last deal. So, and if they agree with you, they're like, yes, that's exactly what I said. Then you can ask them another question. So tell me more. What type of quality service are you looking for? Okay. But if they say, no, that isn't what I said or meant, well, what did I miss? So you're really digging to a deeper level to understand their true underlying need. One of the things I've learned with negotiation is there's the problem people present, and there's the true underlying issue. And many times the problem that people present, or what they say they want to negotiate up front, really isn't the major issue that you're trying to negotiate. That there's some underlying issue that they haven't made explicit.
So, Nan, it sounds to me like you're saying that the whole sales process is a negotiation, because what you're talking about in many ways, I would call discovery. And the negotiation would be sometime later when we've hammered some of these things out, and now we've got a proposal. But would you see the whole process as a negotiation?
Absolutely, because part of negotiation is discovery. That's one of the things I'll often say. Everything in life is negotiable, and so you have to walk into every situation assuming it is a negotiation, and so you need to ask questions to discover the other person's wants, needs, and interests.
Seems like one of the toughest techniques that salespeople deal with is prospects going dark or being silent or not responding. Every time I do a class on negotiations, that's always the technique that people say, well, how do you deal with somebody who goes dark and goes silent? Any tips on how to deal with that?
Well, there's a couple of things to think about. First is just understanding that, rejection, if you're not being rejected, you're not probably trying hard enough. Okay. That rejection is a normal byproduct of negotiation. It's proof that you're trying. Okay. That you're putting yourself out there. And we all know, even though I am horrible at sales, I know that rarely do you get every sale. Rarely do you get every interaction. And so it's trying to think about, number one, are we clear about who the customer is, and do we know what need we're filling for them? Are we clear about that? But also, how do we handle and work through rejection? So a rejection is usually, the way I think of it is, an objection isn't a rejection. It's an opportunity for more information. So when they ghost you, it's following up and saying, hey, haven't heard from you. If you want to break up that's great. Let me know, but I just want to make sure there's some need that I have not missed along the way. And I'd like to have that conversation. But sometimes we just have to accept that or learn to ask different questions. I think one of the best YouTube videos I've ever seen, there was a video on YouTube. It's called What I Learned in 100 Days of Rejection.
Mm-hmm.
And I love that video because it just talks about how we have to change our attitude around rejection and know that sometimes we have to change our approach in figuring out to go back in. We can't do what we've always done. It's not working for us. And so what are we going to do differently when we try and connect with that customer?
Mm.
And so maybe it isn't just the regular call, the regular approach that we've used the last 3 times.
That silent treatment that Scott was talking about could be looked upon as like a negotiation tactic. And I know when I've taught negotiations, I teach tactics so people understand them. Things like the take it or leave it, or you got to do better than that, or the good cop, bad cop, one of those sorts of things. Do you think these should be used in a negotiation, or that people should just not even be aware of them and just kind of go with this honest winning approach that you talked about with relationships and results?
Well, to ask me, I try and live my values. Okay. And so treating people with respect means being honest and caring about what is important to them. And so I guess I don't fully believe in kind of that good cop, bad cop in the sense and some of those other tactics, because I guess I want to treat other people as human beings.
Okay, so that's the relationship building, right?
Yep. It's that, to me, that relationship piece is just as important because that's how I get to those results.
So you wouldn't use them. Should we know about them in order to defend against them in some way?
It never hurts to understand what other people are doing. So, because then you can sometimes call them out on that behavior.
Right.
And so some of being, negotiating is saying, hey, I've seen that tactic, good cop, bad cop. Which are you trying to be?
Right.
And
you have your badges with you?
Yeah. Always injecting some humor never hurts. So I think being able to do that, injecting that humor and calling them out and naming the resistance or the technique and say, hey, can we get back to the tactic of meeting each other's needs versus playing games?
Right. It's funny. I have a quick story to tell. So many years ago, my wife and I were shopping for a sports car. And when we got to the dealership, they said, well, you need to give us money to appraise your car. And I had read a book about negotiation, so I kind of knew what they were doing. My wife was with me. She hadn't read anything. And I said, well, I'll sign your document saying I really am looking, but I'm not going to pay you money to appraise my car. And he said, well, you need to pay me money. But we went back about 3 or 4 times, and my little blonde wife finally banged her hand on the table, said, I don't see why we need to give you any money. And he goes, okay, no, we don't need any money. And it was kind of, we accidentally played the good cop, bad cop, and we didn't even know what we were doing. But it's kind of funny that she just kind of jumped up at him all of a sudden, and that was the end of that trick he was trying. So it was kind of fun.
But part of that is she was speaking to her need and she was requesting to be treated with respect.
Absolutely.
She didn't feel as if she was being treated respectfully, and she was just demanding that of the other person.
It's just very natural for her to say, this isn't right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And, that's okay.
That seems to be like the law of contrast. I think is pretty powerful when you get into a negotiation and you use the law of contrast saying, I'm not going to be playing good cop, bad cop here, or we're not going to be playing good cop, bad cop here. And you're kind of comparing your current behavior to a technique that's old and part of that, snake oil salesperson's type of approach to a conversation. And then people can say, oh yeah, you're not playing good cop, bad cop. And then they wouldn't really know what you're doing unless they had something to compare it against. I love the rule of contrast when you're in negotiation, comparing one thing against another. Are there other techniques like that, Nan, that you find very effective when it comes to a good conversation?
Well, in the contrast, I think what gets to that is I love a tool that's called polarity management. It's a polarity management tool, and all it is a 4-box where, you have to agree on what your common goal is. And maybe it's because I work on negotiation, not necessarily on hard prices, but on relationships many times. But one of the things I love to do is that if you know what your common goal is, you both know why you want what you want, and you both know what's wrong with the other person's idea. But it's giving each other equal time to do it. And so what I often ask people to do is go and brainstorm and tell me everything that's good about your idea or the negotiation, what you want from the deal, and what's wrong with my plan, my approach, my strategy, because it's not just price that we negotiate,
Right.
it's approaches as well. And then you each get a turn. And that's what I'm talking about, in that when you do that, when we get to the bottom half of those 4 boxes, you're talking about, you're each naming what's wrong with the other person's proposal, process, or project, whatever it is that you're talking about. And that's where you identify what their true issues are.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And only when you identify what someone's true issues are can you figure out about what you are actually negotiating around.
Yeah.
Okay. So many times, even like in labor negotiations, everyone will tell you that it's not just salary. That's what you're arguing about. But a lot of times it does come down to respect. The executives make $1 bazillion in bonuses and stock, and it's like, you're not going to give me an extra $1 on my compensation.
Yeah.
And so it does still almost always come down to respect. And so what is the issue below the line again? What are the true issues that people are stuck on? And so it's creating that conversational turn taking where they can flat out tell you exactly why they object to your position.
Yeah.
What's wrong with your position, your idea, your pricing, etc.
That's a great idea. And I would imagine when you do that, you also find out where they have misconceptions about what your offer is. That they're thinking one thing, and you would not have found that out, that they had a misconception, until they've said, well, I don't think you're going to do this. And it's like, wait a minute, where'd you get that idea? So what a great tool.
Yeah. My kids hated me because I started practicing it with them when they were younger. We'd have to sit down and do the 4-box thing on a pretty regular basis.
Right. Wow. So Nan, as we start to wrap up, I'm kind of curious. I always ask this a guest every time I have a guest. What book do you feel has had the greatest impact on the topic that we're talking about, which is negotiations?
I loved Chris Voss's book, Never Split the Difference.
Yeah.
I've read the Getting to Yes. I've read a lot of books on negotiation. I've taken negotiation classes, but it just gives a slightly different perspective. And he really does talk about the importance of asking good questions and listening and trying to understand the other person's core needs.
Yeah. Empathic listening. I'm learning to say that word correctly. Empathic listening.
Yes.
Well, Nan, this has been a great half hour with you. I really appreciate your time. I love your perspective on building those relationships and how important that is, because I think most of our clients, most of our listeners have long-term clients. And if only one person wins in the negotiation, it's just not going to be a good relationship.
Yeah. Well, and we all know it's easier to maintain a good client than it is to find a new one. And so you've got to negotiate and build that strong relationship.
Yeah. Very good. We'll have a link to your website on our show notes so people can visit your website, learn more about you. I encourage everyone to check out your YouTube videos. They're very insightful.
Thank you, Scott.
Thanks, Nan. Thanks for being with us.
Okay. Thank you.
So our golden nugget today, as we wrap things up, is from Samuel Goldwyn, one of the heads of Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer. He said, I don't want yes men around me. I want everybody to tell me the truth, even if it costs them their jobs.
That's hilarious.
That's a great negotiator, isn't it? That's a building relationships quote, isn't it, Nan?
Right.
Yeah, that's an awesome one. I actually have a cup that looks something like that. It's like somebody is sitting. It's an old cartoon, and somebody at the front of the table is like, everyone who agrees with my idea, yes.
Right.
Everyone else, your boxes are in the back. Go pack up.
Exactly. Grab your box on the way out.
That's right.
Yeah.
All right.
Great. So again, everything we talked about is going to be at the website winningatselling.com. This is episode 569.
And then next week, we're going to continue with How to Win Friends and Influence People, Part 2, Chapters 4, 5, and 6. And our topic is going to be, should I stay or should I go? The sales culture. Go out and get better one skill at a time.
Joyful selling.